Raghav Menon, a kind-hearted Indian engineer known for helping anyone in need, walked toward a stranger one quiet night in Pittsburgh, and within seconds, a single gunshot ended his life. Emily Foster, his quiet neighbor, hid a secret connection to the killer. Kyle Benton, a disturbed ex-convict lost in paranoia, mistook compassion for threat. Detective Laura Kent, determined to uncover the truth, would soon expose how one act of kindness spiraled into a deadly collision of obsession delusion. And fate, a story that left an entire community asking how something so human could end so violently. Raghav Menon had always been the kind of man who noticed small things, the flicker of a street lamp, a neighbor's struggling grocery bag, or a stranger sitting alone in the dark. That habit of gentle awareness had made him well-liked among his community. In Pittsburgh's Bloomfield district, he lived a quiet life, working as a software engineer by day and spending evenings on video calls with his family back in Kerala, India. But on that crisp spring night, his attention to detail would draw him into something he could never escape. The air carried a faint chill, the kind that made the edges of the night feel sharp. Raghav had gone out late to pick up milk and bread from the small convenience store a few blocks away. It was nearly 10:30 when he parked his car on the curb outside his apartment building, the street nearly empty except for the faint hum of a streetlight. As he stepped out, balancing his grocery bag, he noticed a figure sitting on the sidewalk a short distance away. The man was hunched forward, his arms resting on his knees, head bowed low. Something about the sight made Raghav pause. The man's clothes looked dirty, his body language unsteady, almost trembling. For a few seconds, Raghav stood frozen beside his car, unsure whether to approach or just go inside. He glanced around, but the street was deserted. It wasn't unusual to see homeless people in the area, yet there was something different about this one, something uneasy, almost dangerous. Still, Raghav's natural empathy took over. He took a slow step forward, his hand still clutching the grocery bag, the plastic handle stretching under the weight. The sound of his footsteps echoed faintly off the pavement. The man didn't move. The flickering streetlight cast long, shifting shadows across the road. A soft breeze rustled through the nearby trees, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth. As Raghav drew closer, he saw that the man's hands were trembling, his breathing quick, almost panicked. Concern filled Raghav's mind. He had no idea that within moments, this quiet act of kindness would turn fatal. There was no argument, no sign of confrontation, just a single, deafening crack that tore through the stillness of the night. The sound bounced off the apartment walls, startling anyone within earshot. Birds scattered from the nearby trees, and the grocery bag slipped from Raghav's hand, its contents spilling across the pavement, a carton of milk leaking onto the concrete, bread rolling into the gutter. His body collapsed beside the car, the faint glow of the streetlight illuminating the crimson spreading across his shirt. Windows lit up around the block as residents peered out, trying to understand what had happened. A few rushed outside, some shouting for help, others frozen in disbelief. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights painted the quiet neighborhood in chaos. But the man who had been sitting on the curb was gone, swallowed by the darkness between buildings. As paramedics arrived, their hurried movements filled the air with urgency, but Raghav was already beyond saving. The groceries he'd bought for the next morning's breakfast lay scattered beside him, small, ordinary things that suddenly seemed unbearably sad. What had begun as an act of concern ended as a headline that would shake the entire community. The man known for his kindness had been taken down by a single, senseless moment of violence, leaving behind only questions and the haunting echo of that gunshot in a quiet Pittsburgh street. The following morning, Pittsburgh woke to a story that spread faster than the dawn itself. Local news stations interrupted their regular programming with breaking updates. An Indian-origin man had been shot dead outside his apartment for what appeared to be an act of concern. The details were scarce, but the few that emerged painted a horrifying picture. Raghav Menon had been unarmed, gentle, and killed moments after approaching someone who seemed in distress. Within hours, his name was circulating across social media platforms, accompanied by words like senseless, tragic, and heartbreaking. The Bloomfield community was shaken to its core. Neighbors who had seen Raghav every day now gathered in disbelief outside his apartment complex. The police had taped off the area, the yellow barrier fluttering softly in the morning wind. Flowers began to appear near the spot where he had fallen, lilies, marigolds, and candles arranged by people who didn't even know him personally but felt the weight of his death. For many Indian immigrants living in the city, the murder struck a deeper nerve. Raghav represented everything they believed about quiet survival in a foreign land, hard work, politeness, and the hope of safety. His death broke that fragile illusion. Detective Laura Kent arrived at the scene just after sunrise. She was a veteran officer, the kind who noticed patterns others missed. The first thing she saw was the emptiness of the surroundings. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned trash cans, no footprints leading away, no sign of theft. Raghav's wallet and phone had been found in his jacket pocket, untouched. It wasn't a robbery. The shot had been deliberate, close range, and clean. Whoever fired it had done so without hesitation. The detectives reviewed surveillance footage from nearby stores and street cameras. One blurry image showed Raghav parking his car and stepping out with his groceries. A faint figure could be seen sitting on the sidewalk, face hidden under a dark hood. The camera flickered, and seconds later, Raghav's body hit the ground. The shooter's face never appeared clearly. The timing suggested the encounter had lasted no more than 30 seconds. It was not random, at least not entirely. As the day went on, calls poured into the police station. Witnesses described seeing a man wandering the area earlier in the week, muttering to himself, sometimes shouting at nothing. Others recalled hearing a single gunshot and then footsteps running away. The accounts were inconsistent, but pointed to one truth. This wasn't a planned attack. It was something impulsive, possibly triggered by a fragile mind. Meanwhile, the Indian diaspora across the United States reacted with grief and outrage. Online forums filled with messages of sorrow and fear. Community leaders called for justice, emphasizing the growing unease among immigrants who already felt unseen. Raghav's family in India received the devastating news late that evening. Their faces captured on video calls filled with disbelief and tears. By the end of the second day, Pittsburgh police officially classified the case as a homicide motivated by unknown circumstances. But for Detective Kent, that phrase meant only one thing. They had no clear suspect, no motive, and no answers. All she had was the haunting image of a kind man offering help to a stranger and being met with a bullet in return. Somewhere in the city, a killer was walking free, and the reason behind the murder was still buried in silence. Detective Laura Kent knew that when a case had no clear motive, it was usually the motive itself that held the key. Over the next few days, she pored through every report, every witness statement, and every second of camera footage. The streets around Raghav Menon's apartment were mapped, frame by frame, minute by minute. Somewhere in the silence of that night, she believed, lay a clue, something small, enough to be overlooked but significant enough to explain why an innocent man was gunned down for showing concern. The investigation took its first turn when a woman named Emily Foster came forward. She lived 2 buildings away from Raghav and had seen the same unknown man loitering near her property a few nights before the shooting. Her statement matched other residents who had complained about a strange figure wandering through the neighborhood at odd hours, mumbling to himself and occasionally yelling into the air. The man's description was vague. White male, late 20s, thin build, wearing a dark hoodie. But one detail stood out: a tattoo on his right hand shaped like a small cross. Detective Kent sent the description across to local police databases. Within a few hours, a match surfaced: Kyle Benton, a 29-year-old with a history of assault and mental instability. He had been released from the Allegheny County Correctional Facility 3 months earlier, after serving a 2-year sentence for aggravated assault. His file revealed a troubled past, repeated arrests, psychiatric evaluations, and a trail of restraining orders from women who had once known him. A search of nearby homeless shelters confirmed he had been seen just days before the shooting, agitated and unstable. One staff member recalled him speaking incoherently about people watching him and voices trying to trap him. His paranoia had worsened after his release, and he often drifted around unfamiliar neighborhoods, hiding from imaginary threats. Bloomfield, it seemed, had become his new haunt. Detective Kent visited the area again, looking for any sign of Benton's presence. Behind a grocery store dumpster, they found discarded food wrappers and a tattered jacket with the same cross tattoo, drawn in marker across the sleeve. DNA testing would take days, but Kent already sensed the connection. Kyle Benton wasn't just a random name, he was the shadow that had been circling Raghav's quiet street for weeks. Witnesses later recalled seeing him pacing back and forth near the intersection shortly before the murder. One resident described him as sweating and trembling, like someone about to explode. It was enough for the police to issue an alert for Benton. But when they searched his last known locations, he was gone. No phone, no car, no trace. The case began to unravel into two possibilities. Either Benton had killed Raghav in a sudden fit of delusion, or there was more between them than anyone realized. But Raghav's calm, disciplined life showed no link to the violent drifter. To his friends and colleagues, he was the last person who could have had enemies still. Detective Kent couldn't shake the thought that something personal had driven Benton to that street. The randomness didn't add up. Why there? Why Raghav? Why that moment? As she stood under the same flickering streetlight where Raghav's body had fallen, she felt the same uneasy stillness the night must have held. Somewhere in the darkness, madness and coincidence had collided, and the result was death. As the days turned into weeks, the case seemed to lose momentum. The police had identified a suspect, but Kyle Benton had disappeared as if the city had swallowed him whole. There were no transactions, no phone activity, and no leads on his movements. Detective Laura Kent knew from experience that fugitives like Kyle rarely stayed hidden for long. But this one was different. He wasn't running from the law. He was running from his own mind. Still, something about his link to the neighborhood felt incomplete. He hadn't chosen Bloomfield at random. He had come there for a reason. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through Raghav's closest friend, Dr. Samir Dutt, who worked with him at the same software firm. While clearing out Raghav's desk to prepare for a memorial service, Samir found a note on his computer. It was a short message he had saved hours before his death. "Guy near mailbox again. Looks lost. We'll check if he's all right." The message confirmed what police had already suspected. Raghav had noticed Kyle before, but there was more. In Raghav's phone gallery, a photo taken 2 weeks earlier showed the same man standing near a familiar house. After cross-checking addresses, Detective Kent realized it was Emily Foster's property. That discovery changed the direction of the investigation. Emily had told police she didn't know Kyle personally, only that she had seen him wandering. But now, the evidence suggested otherwise. Detective Kent visited Emily again, this time unannounced. The young woman looked tense as Kent showed her the photo. She hesitated for a long time before finally admitting the truth. Kyle Benton had once been her boyfriend. Their relationship had ended over a year earlier when Emily discovered his violent temper. What began as small outbursts quickly turned into threats and physical confrontations. She had filed a restraining order after he broke into her apartment one night, screaming that she had betrayed him. Kyle was later arrested for assault and sent to prison. Emily had since moved to Bloomfield to start over, keeping her past private. But Kyle had found her again after his release. He had been showing up near her home, watching from across the street. She hadn't reported it because she didn't want to reopen old wounds. Raghav, being her friendly neighbor, had noticed her distress. A few days before the shooting, he had reportedly stepped in when Kyle appeared near Emily's porch, asking her questions and shouting. Raghav had calmly told him to leave and later checked in on her to make sure she was fine. That single act of kindness marked him in Kyle's unstable mind as the man who had taken everything away. Detective Kent realized the murder was not random at all. It was the result of delusion twisted by rage and jealousy. Kyle had been stalking Emily, consumed by obsession, and Raghav's concern for her became the spark that triggered his paranoia. When Raghav saw him again that night and approached to ask if he was all right, Kyle's fragile grip on reality shattered completely. To him, it wasn't a friendly question. It was confrontation, humiliation, and betrayal all at once. The bullet he fired was meant to silence the ghost of his own failure. The case file, once filled with uncertainty, now had a story that was both chilling and heartbreaking. A man had died not because of hate or theft, but because of someone else's madness. A kindness mistaken for threat, a gesture turned into tragedy. The manhunt for Kyle Benton stretched for 9 tense days. Police units spread across Pittsburgh's outer districts, checking abandoned buildings, shelters, and old motels. Flyers with his face, pale, unshaven, hollow-eyed, were pinned to every lamppost. His description was read out in every police briefing: unstable, armed, and dangerous. The city that had mourned Raghav Menon now held its breath, waiting for justice. Detective Laura Kent barely slept, spending her nights reviewing Benton's psychological records and mapping his known routes. She believed he hadn't fled far. People like him rarely did. They clung to familiar corners of their chaos. The break came from a sanitation worker who reported movement inside an old steel factory on the edge of town. It had been closed for years, a massive shell of rust and decay. Patrol officers surrounded the building at dawn. Inside, they found makeshift bedding, half-eaten food cans, and scattered pages torn from a notebook. In the far corner, behind a pile of scrap metal, sat Kyle Benton, trembling, disoriented, and clutching a pistol. He didn't resist. His hands shook violently as the officers moved in. When they cuffed him, he muttered phrases that made no sense. Something about people stealing his thoughts and a man who took her away. The weapon in his possession was immediately sent for forensic testing. The results confirmed what everyone already feared. It was the same gun that had fired the bullet which killed Raghav Menon. Kyle's fingerprints matched perfectly. In his tattered notebook, investigators found fragments of a delusional narrative, scribbled sentences repeated over and over. "He thinks he's better than me. She won't talk because of him, and the voices told me to stop him before he hurts her." The entries revealed a mind drowning in paranoia, jealousy, and guilt. During questioning, Kyle's mental state swung between confusion and rage. He spoke of Emily Foster as though she still belonged to him, and of Raghav as an intruder who pretended to care. He believed that Raghav had turned Emily against him, that the neighborhood was conspiring to humiliate him. In his delusion, pulling the trigger had felt like taking control back. Detective Kent listened quietly to every word, knowing that beneath the madness lay the truth of how easily compassion could be twisted. By a broken mind, when the case finally closed, it left behind a silence that settled heavily over Bloomfield. Raghav's friends and neighbors gathered for a memorial, lighting candles at the spot where he had fallen. Emily stood among them, holding back tears, knowing that her past had indirectly stolen the life of a man who only meant to protect her. Dr. Samir Dutt delivered a eulogy that spoke of kindness, courage, and the danger of indifference. The headlines called Raghav's story a tragedy that shocked the diaspora. But for those who knew him, it was more than that. It was a reminder of how fragile human decency could be in the face of fear and instability. A single question asked out of concern, "Are you all right, bud?" had become the moment that ended a life and exposed the violent unpredictability of the human mind. Detective Kent would later describe it as one of the saddest cases she had ever worked. A crime without reason, born from the very thing that made Raghav Menon who he was: kindness.